So Connie Schultz needs no introduction from me, but I'll try anyway. You probably know her as well as I do, which is to say pretty well, because she's been genuinely and generously sharing her views with us for 30 years now. And most of the time, we probably agree with what she has to say.
Not everybody.
Her columns appeared in the Plain Dealer from 1993 to 2011, and more recently, her work is published through the Creators Syndicate and Parade magazine. She won a Pulitzer Prize in 2005 for her pungent columns that provided a voice for the underdog and underprivileged. She is the author of 2 previous nonfiction books, Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths, and His Lovely Wife, a memoir about her experiences on the campaign trail. Daughters of Erietown has been named a book not to miss by USA Today, a June must-read by the Washington Post, and it recently landed on the New York Times bestseller list. The Philadelphia Inquirer said it reads like comfort food. Now I'll hand it off to Jason and Connie. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Connie. So I want to start with the epigraph. I want to start with the beginning of Daughters of Erietown. You are best known at this point for your nonfiction. And you immediately address that in the epigraph. You use the quote from A Tree Grows in Brooklyn about the difference between a lie and a story. Specifically, that the story is the truth as it should have been. Now, there are autobiographical flourishes in your first novel. Is this the truth as it should have been?
No, I would say it's life as I would love to have imagined it in some ways, particularly for the main female character, Ellie McGinty, who certainly has elements of my mom in her, but then becomes a very different person in other ways. So, of course, that's part of what is involved in fictional storytelling. All right, that was Franklin.
It happens. It happens. Franklin's welcome too. Now, is there a reason that you chose Erietown as opposed to Ashtabula? Is there a reason you chose a kind of like a conglomeration of a location?
Well, it's a fictional version of Ashtabula, and that came about in part from advice from my editor, Kate Medina, early on. You can have it be similar to Ashtabula in many ways, but don't call it Ashtabula because it simply invites every critic who knows you got something wrong. And that seemed like really sound advice to me. And I did want Erietown to be different in some ways from Ashtabula. So the way I've explained it often is I grew up a working class kid in a small working class town on Lake Erie. And this is set in a small working class town on Lake Erie.
Okay. Now there's an old joke about James Joyce, that he left his hometown and spent the rest of his life writing about nothing else. Now, it's been a while since you've lived in Ashtabula, but it's still with you. How come people can leave their hometown, but their hometown won't leave them?
Well, because our roots are our beginnings. They're not our excuses, but they're always going to be our beginnings. And for me, it's very important to remember Ashtabula because as I said, I was a working class kid. I grew up there. I was the first in the family to go to college. It matters a lot to me that I'm from Ashtabula. And my siblings have all lived in Ashtabula still. I'm going to have to close that door. I'm sorry. I'll be right back. I'm going to close it. All right. Sorry about that.
Such are the times. Such are the times we live in. We'd much rather have you with Franklin than not be able to converse at all.
Thank you. He's standing at the top. I'm at the top of the stairs, and he's standing right outside there, barking at people walking by the front door. So there you have it.
He's a good puppy. He's a good puppy.
Thank you. He is. So, of course, I would be. Ashtabula matters a great deal to me. My siblings still live there. My parents live there all of their adult lives, and to leave that behind would be to reject who I come from, and I would never do that. I can see. I'm working on my next novel. I can easily imagine it taking place in Erietown with all different people. But I like the town. I like what it's becoming in my head over time. And I look forward to getting to learn a little bit more about it.
Is Erietown going to become like the Lake Wobegon? Are we going to see a series of stories?
I don't know that yet. I'm in the beginning stages of this next novel, but I certainly think, Erietown represents something. It's not just about this particular town. It represents in my mind anyway, a large swath of America. And it's the America that's not on the coast. And these are stories not full of lucky, affluent people with affluent people problems. It's the stories, particularly of women over several decades, women who so often commit small acts of heroism on a regular basis, but that no one knows them because those aren't the women we write about.
I mean, there's not a lot of stories that get told about rural and suburban Ohio. I mean, after Winesburg, Ohio, you've got like Rita Dove occasionally leaving Akron, and I guess Stephen Markley sometimes. Toni Morrison, for as spectacular as she is, wasn't really out there writing Ohio stories.
No, well, I think it seemed to me, at least from all that I've read of Toni Morrison, that she was happy to be gone. But let's be clear on who's telling that story. It's an African American woman who grew up in in Northeast Ohio, the far reaches of it, in a small town, and the experiences were not always great. She had a lot to talk about and a lot to write about, and she really believed in representing, and that's what she was doing. And in my way, I guess that's what I feel like I'm doing, but it's with working class women. And in my view, it's not just white working class women, as it's represented in the story itself. I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood in Ashtabula. Half of my classmates all through elementary school were African American, just as Sam's are. And I wanted to include that in part because that's not an unusual story in small towns, especially in working class neighborhoods. And when you learn at a young age that your very best friends don't have to look like you to be like you, it really informs the trajectory of your life. And I wanted to show that with Sam McGinty. I mean, one of the greatest moments or ongoing episodes of tension between her and her father, Brick, are over race because they see it so differently. And I also know this about the working class. That's why I say our roots are our beginnings, but they're not our excuses. You can grow up with racism, but you decide whether or not you're going to make that your legacy and that you're going to inherit it and keep doing it. You can decide to reject that. And I really oppose the narrative that casts all white working class people as born to racism, right? I think we become adults and we make our own choices.
And also, let's be honest, that's such a lazy trope.
Sure it is.
That's such a lazy trope. Like, oh, I inherited so-and-so's hate, or like, because I was born near the poverty line, I must dislike those who look like me. That's the sort of thing you assume if you actually don't know people who live there.
Well, that's right. Too many of our stories have been told by people who don't know us and aren't of us. And I don't mean to suggest ever that a writer must be of a certain group of people to be able to write about them well, but you certainly have to have a curiosity about them so that you're open to learning about them as opposed to just making your assumptions and running with them.
Absolutely. Okay. I know you can get in so much trouble fishing for themes. I do. Mark Twain suggests you get shot for it. I'm not saying that we have to go there. But this book, is very, very specifically written about the women of Erietown, hence the title, the Angies, Ellies, Sams, and even the Rosemaries. Rosemaries or Rosemaries? What's the plural here?
Rosemary.
Marys. Okay. Did you start with characters and build a story around them? Or did you have an idea for a story and you populate it with the characters?
This entire novel began with the knock at the door. And those who have read the book will know what I'm talking about. And in fact, it was the beginning of the novel originally. My editor wisely said to me that I was giving too much away to the story because I wanted to have that knock at the door, set up the scene, and then go back in time to show how we've come to this moment. I decided to write it very differently in terms of organizing it. Of course, Rosemary showing up is an earthquake in this family, but she was a young woman with hopes and dreams too. And I didn't want to cast her as just a stereotypical anything. I mean, she's naive at times. She's too hopeful at times. She makes some really big mistakes, as does pretty much everyone in the book. And one of the ongoing themes of the book, I hope, is that most of us are better than our biggest mistakes. And that's part of what I try to show through the course of the decades in the story of Erietown.
And one of the key similarities between what you've been writing for, the nonfiction, the columns, books, and Daughters of Erietown, is your empathy. Rosemary, to give a modest spoiler to those who haven't read the book, a modest one, Rosemary is the other woman in this. And at no time is she vilified. At no time is she reduced to that role. She's
Hmm.
never just the person who tries to take someone else's significant other. She is always a full-fledged person who does this thing, as opposed to just being the person who does that thing.
Which is true of any woman who's in her circumstances, no matter how much we may hate them, depending on if it's happening to us or to a friend of ours, or, it's easy to villainize them, but there is more to her than that.
And one of the things that struck me about that is just how true to your whole ethos that is you may disagree with this person's choices, but let's take a second to understand why they might make these choices.
Well, I guess that has been driving my work for my decades in journalism, which is one of the things I most love about journalism. What I don't know, I can explore and question until I find out more. And people are inherently complicated. I tell my students, as you know, I'm a professional in residence at the journalism school at my alma mater, Kent State. And I tell my students, when you're looking for stories, looking perhaps for profiles to do, just remember this: no matter what the story is, no matter how big it seems, it's really about the people in it. And that's where we can come in and tell the stories behind the stories, which is often involves profiles of the people who are involved in it. And that's how I got my start really at the Plain Dealer. I was freelancing for a number of years before I got hired there, and I did a lot of work for their Sunday magazine. And I did a lot of profiles. I did, I think, more than 40 cover stories before I got hired. Many of them were profiles of people who've been in the news. People thought they had an idea of who they were, but I knew there had to be a lot more to them because that's just human nature. And I love the chance to show others who that person was.
Absolutely. Now, pardon me, I'm going to pivot gently here. You can create quite a reading list from the books that get name checked in Daughters of Erietown. No, seriously, Feminine Mystique, Our Bodies Ourselves, The Women's Room, The Prophet. Are there any books that are on the character Sam's reading list that didn't make the novel? Any other books?
Well, of course, because Sam's a reader, right? But in the next novel, one of the ideas I'm playing with right now is a bookstore that is in Erietown, that it's run by one of the main characters. Because I know from growing up that many working class people read a lot. It was certainly the tradition in my home. And I just love slipping those things in. I like making it clear that Ellie is a nurse's aide who also loves to read books, and her daughter, when she goes to college, starts sharing some of those books with her mom. Ellie also, as much as she would love for her daughter not to be sexually active before she marries because of what happened to her, but she knows it's a likelihood, and she wants to prevent what happened to her happening to her daughter. So we have that moment where she buys her a book, even though it's such a challenge for her because she doesn't want her daughter to think she was a mistake. And these are such common conversations that happens in families all the time. I mean, working class people are just like everyone else, including the lucky people in the world, and the more affluent. They have their hopes and dreams and their aspirations, particularly for their children. The difference comes when there are big problems in their lives and they don't have the money to fix them. And that's the story of the Daughters of Erietown as much as anything else. What happens when you don't have the money to throw at it, when you can't just buy your way out of trouble? Then you've got to live with these mistakes in a different way. And that's when lives can really derail.
Absolutely. The notion that it takes generations to rise, as opposed to just like a single extraordinary individual.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned that you were the first in your family to go to college. What does that pressure feel like?
It's pretty much represented in Sam in the book, Samantha McGinty. When you are the first in your family to go to college, you will straddle two worlds for the rest of your life. And necessarily so, in part because you never want to not show respect for your roots and the parents of your roots, right? I mean, my father says something very similar to Brick: don't ever forget where you came from and who you came from. But you also are introduced to such a bigger world when you get to go away and get to go to college. And you don't want to be arrogant about that, but you don't want to not explore the benefits that come and the opportunities that come from learning so much more about the world. It broadens your own version of yourself and your own vision for yourself. So I see that. I certainly felt I've seen it in so many people I've known, so many people I've written about over the years. And I see it in some of my students who are the first in their families to go to college. there is that inevitable tension there. And they feel responsible in two worlds, responsible to make sure everyone always knows how much they appreciate where they come from, and responsible in taking full advantage of these opportunities they've had.
Absolutely. Okay, now completely change the subject. You have one anecdote in your novel that feels so specific that I'd swear it was somewhere back in Schultz family lore. There is one character who is found drunk and naked in a fountain in downtown Andover. So I have to know, is this just something conjured from the glorious imagination of Connie Schultz, or is there a story somewhere that you once heard about somebody being found in the nude and inebriated in a fountain in Ashtabula County?
Well, it's a version of what happened to my maternal grandmother. And she lost all her kids, except for the son who back then they would call mentally retarded. And my mother was raised by her grandparents. So that part of Ellie's narrative comes straight from that. It's interesting. My sister Tony and I were talking the other day about the book, and she said, you know, now that I've read your novel, it has occurred to me that Mom was always afraid of being abandoned. And I didn't even put it together with my mom so much as just writing about Ellie, that Ellie, when you're given up as a child and you're old enough to know what's going on, I mean, she was 8, I think, 7 or 8, it does make you think that you could always be abandoned again. And it can inform so much about how you feel about yourself and how you proceed in the world, right? And I always knew that story. My sister Leslie was much closer to our maternal grandmother. I was very close to our great grandmother who raised my mom. My great grandmother used to go to the quilting bee, which is how I became familiar with the whole concept of just walking down the street in the country to the church and hanging out with the women for several hours at a time. And you don't have to be very old before it dawns on you that there's a lot more going on than just sewing and stitching.
Yeah. There's always the whisper network. There's always the whisper network.
Well, it was also a way for checking in on one another and checking in on their community.
You know, in the chat box, there was someone who specifically asked, you know, can we talk about the theme of abandonment in this? Because it's not just Ellie who has, it is a perpetual theme throughout this. Was that intentional, or did this just occur by the process of telling a story?
I would say it just occurred through the process of telling the story. I was certainly more mindful of it as I was writing Ellie's story because she's early in the book. But much of that issue of abandonment, I came back and added, like the conversation that the grandmother and grandfather have. When the grandmother's saying to him, basically, you need to let her know she's never going to have to leave us. And he thinks this is absurd. Of course not. But she's trying to explain to him, here's what it's like to be her. And you don't really tell her how you feel. So she'll expect and interpret the worst. I mean, this is a story of secrets, is it not? I mean, we all have our secrets. And so many people have their secrets, or they don't tell the full story of something, so they're misunderstood. And so much can go wrong from a misunderstanding. And
not to spoil anything, I think it's fair to say that, as we're reaching the conclusion of your story, there is the potential for one last secret to become public knowledge. And in the end, certain family members decide maybe this stays a secret. And maybe this is my own bias, but that feels like a very Ohio decision. It's like, maybe that one stays in the closet. Maybe
I didn't think of it as a regional thing. I thought of it as a daughter who's always been was raised to take care of her family, particularly of her mother, take care of her mother. And she's looking at how she can prevent more harm. And she'll shoulder this, she'll take it on herself, which is very consistent with that character, I would say. I would hope that one of the things that comes from this book is, I would like us to acknowledge it's not a good idea to make your child your confidant, because that child will grow up always feeling responsible for other people, even people who really have no business relying on that person.
It was hard reading about like an 8-year-old Sam being the family therapist. It was brutal because the tragedy was she was good at it, so she had to do it her entire life.
Well, she was trained to do it. I mean, if you're raised to do something at a young age, you can become good at just about anything. She certainly is a naturally empathetic person, I suppose, but she was raised from a very early age to worry about her mother.
I'm gonna hit a couple lines. You have some very good lines in Daughters of Erietown.
Thank you.
And I want to get the director's commentary on some of these lines. The one that broke my heart into like seven different parts. It's septupled. The line, "There must be good fathers out there." That line hit me hard, in part because it's borne out with some very typical father mistakes. Mistakes that I, as a father, make sometimes. But what in your mind makes for a good father?
Oh, well, I'm married to one, so I would say
And your
part
lovely
of
husband.
yeah. I mean, he really loves not just the two daughters he raised, but my two kids, and all of the grandchildren are our grandchildren, right? So there, to me, it's this heart. I mean, to give you an idea of the influence Sherrod has had on my daughter, she was 15 when she met him, and talk about earthquakes in a family. She was used to being with her mom, a single mom for a decade, and we had the only male in our family was one of the cats. Everything else was female. But when her son was born, Milo, his middle name is Milo Sherrod Molina. So I've had a lot to think about in terms of what makes a good father, and in the characters. And the thing is, you don't have to be an effusive man to be a good father. You just have to, Brick in many ways is a good father. He stumbles horribly at times, and certainly in his marriage, he's not always a great husband. But in his way, he tries, and even towards the end of the book, he's trying to be open to something that he couldn't even imagine for his daughter when she was a little girl. And in fact, it caused a lot of tension just because she even had Black friends, right? So one of the things a male friend said to me recently that really touched me, he said, "Thank you for not making all the men jerks in this book." And I thought, well, why would they be? Lots of men aren't jerks. We're different in many ways, and there are inevitable tensions. And I wanted to show all that, but I also wanted to show that there are different ways. I mean, Coach, as another person who's never had children, but he certainly is a good father figure for Brick.
There's one detail about both Brick and Coach that I loved, and that neither of them really understood why Ellie should be allowed to graduate until a woman explained it to them. You don't make them jerks, but you do make the point that sometimes you have to explain to people so they get there. That felt like a very real detail.
Well, and it was the 1950s, keep in mind. And women were treated differently from the boys or men who were involved in the unplanned pregnancy. And women were not allowed typically to graduate. And keep in mind too, Ellie's not in New York City, where there were even back then some options for women that just simply did not exist in a small rural community in Northeast Ohio. And I wanted to show what it meant to be that woman. It's been very rewarding to hear from young female readers of this novel, because so many of them are telling me they really had to think differently about their moms and their grandmothers and what they may have been through. And they want to talk to them more. They want to hear more of their stories, which to me is fantastic, because I think we know too few of these women's stories to begin with. But I love that response to it. It hadn't even occurred to me that would be part of this experience in reading it for some. I just really wanted to be accurate about the times. And that book that Ellie reads, that passage that she was given as a gift, a wedding gift, that book actually exists. The one she throws across the room. I have the hardbound copy of it.
When you were throwing out the quote, I know you're a quote collector, and we'll get into that later. But when I read the quote, I'm like, oh no, this is one she's seen. This is one that's on the shelf somewhere, perhaps getting ready for burning. But
oh man, I remember when I first thought, I said, poor Sharon, it's one of those moments. All right, listen to this. I have to read this entire passage to you. I just couldn't even believe it. But of course, that's what women were being told about themselves back then. And I wanted to include it because I wanted to be that moment when this is when Ellie's weighing how to help her daughter, how best to help her daughter, who is now in her late teens, right? She's about to go to college, and she goes through her cedar chest, which everyone, when you come from a small town, I have a cedar chest, both my sisters have a cedar chest. My mom had one. It's called a hope chest, right? It was a hope chest, yeah. And I wanted Ellie to be rummaging through it and finds that, and it really gels for her. In that moment, she knows what she has to do.
Now, another complete tangent, but another quote that you have that I love is you write about foods that are not afraid to announce themselves when you're talking about the food at the Italian restaurant.
Yes.
Foods that you immediately feel their presence. You know,
Right.
I feel like every household has those comfort foods. By the way, comfort food, when it's written on the coast, is slang for Midwestern. But
That's right.
when I have
That's
that
right.
Philadelphia
Good
Inquirer, I'm like, that's a great quote about somebody who's not coming to our town anytime soon.
Right. Right.
But I want to know, in your household growing up, what were the foods that were not afraid to announce themselves? What were you smelling as you entered the room?
You know, when I was growing up, my mom was the one cooking, and she did make pretty mild dishes, right, for the most part. My dad got interested in cooking Italian foods starting when I was in high school, which is why I kept thinking about foods that announce themselves, because all of a sudden we're using garlic. We had never used garlic before, right? Anchovies and some of the sauces. I mean, and he and I would cook together. He would bring home these recipes. I have no idea where he was getting them half the time. And then we started going out. We never went out to eat when I was a kid. That was just, which is not uncommon for working class
I say,
families.
who had the money for it? You know,
Exactly, right.
there was one restaurant and you saw it on Easter.
Right. So the food that we were going to get, the new food we were going to get exposed to, had to be at home. My mom went to work as a nurse's aide when I was in high school. So I started taking on more of the cooking, and that's when I started experimenting more with food. So one of the things I liked about including it is food is a universal memory for most people. Even if it's not the dishes that I'm writing about, they have food memories. And I wanted to respect that is part of anybody's experience, is what we eat, what we smell when we walk in a home. And I thought it was an easy way to close the distance sometimes for the characters.
Now, in Daughters of Erietown, you spend a lot of time talking about good teachers. And sometimes they're literally teachers in the classroom, but sometimes they're just people who teach well, like Coach, like Sam. And you even specifically invoke Annie Sullivan, Helen Kellen's teacher. So I want to know, who was your Annie Sullivan?
My elementary school teacher that had the most impact on me was Mrs. Norton in third grade. She was my first Black teacher, the only Black teacher at the school. She recognized in me a sensitivity and a creativity. She started encouraging me to write. When I look back on it now, I see what an influence she had on me at a very young age. She also was an early role model for me of somebody who didn't look like me, but who understood me. Again, I can't overstate the importance of that. And then when I got to high school, there was Mr. Tom Carr and Mr. Joe Petro, who knew I needed to leave. I needed to go to college, and I needed to get out to do what I wanted to do. And that was really something, because not every teacher believed in me that way, of course. And I remember one writing teacher would not recommend me for senior English. And when I told her that I wanted to be a writer, she said, "You're never going to be a writer." So it's really good that no motivates me. I have a friend, Bill Lubinger, a former colleague at the Plain Dealer, a dear friend, and he once said to me, "If you want to get Connie going, you want to see what gets her, tell her no, and that'll pretty much guarantee it." And I think that came from early in my life. You know, if you know there's something in you and you really want to believe in it, you have to know that some people don't know what they're talking about when they tell you you don't. That's how you do it.
Out of curiosity, did Mrs. Norton get to live to see you win the Pulitzer? Did she get that moment?
I believe she did, because I heard from her daughter when she died, and I believe that's one of the things she wanted me to know. I don't remember exactly. I hope she did. I do. I really do. In our class picture, I'm standing right next to her in our class picture. I mean, I just love this woman. And I rushed up the riser.
Absolutely. Don't get me wrong, that's quite the personal accomplishment, but that's also an accomplishment for everybody who ever put some fuel in the jetpack and said, you gotta fly.
Yeah. Oh no, that's right. I mean, I wish my mom had lived to see it. She did not, but my dad was alive for it.
Right. So once again, to tangent from that poignant moment, there's a great thrill in this novel whenever Ellie gets sassy. Whenever, in part because she doesn't get sassy for so long.
No.
Now, I know you a little bit. I don't want to exaggerate my knowledge of you, but you're pretty good with a turn of the phrase. You're quick with the quip. Knowing you and your wit, how many great retorts did you write for Ellie that you couldn't put in there because it wasn't that time in the character arc yet?
That's a great question. There were some I just couldn't use because there aren't stuff she would say, but I have saved some of them because I'm thinking maybe in this next book, I have a character who possibly could. Sam gets pretty mouthy at times, but I mean,
yes.
Sam is Sam, and she's a teenager in a different time, right? And she's also really, she's very critical at one point of her mom for not having a career in the same way that she hopes to have, which is a really stupid but pretty typical way for a teenager of that time to behave, right? And I wanted to show the tension there.
Well, it's the old Oscar Wilde line. If you start by loving your parents, then you hate them, and if you live long enough, you forgive them.
Right.
Sam got to live the arc. Now, you can't tell me that there weren't all these fun little quips without feeding me one. Bear in mind, you got to save some for the next novel. Nothing for me. No, I deserve nothing. That's fair. Okay.
I can tell you that you're not getting any.
Now, to cycle back, I do know you're a quote collector, and a few from your collection made Erietown. Do you have a favorite quote from your book? Do you have a favorite quote from your book, like a favorite Connie Schultz quote?
No, I think that would be really obnoxious if I said, hey, here's something I said that I really love that I said, and here's another one, and I'm really that obnoxious. No, I don't. I'm always surprised to see what other people quote from it and see some of the quotes bubbling up. And it's very rewarding to see that, but no, I don't have any, no.
I have to tell you, I absolutely love the line, God gives you what he gives you, and then you try not to hold it against him. That was a spectacular line.
Thank you.
Spectacular. So, like, allow me to be obnoxious because you won't be. But that was a great line.
Thank you.
JFK's assassination is an anchor moment in the story. It puts it in a specific place, both temporally and emotionally. Everyone remembers where they were then heard it. Where were you when you heard about JFK's assassination?
I was in first grade, just as Sam was. And our teacher pulled a chair up to the front of the classroom. In the book, it's a piano bench. And then the scene unfolds in a totally fictional way. But that's where I was. And I do remember it was Mrs. Barrett. And she said, children, I have terrible news. And it was the first time, second time that I had seen my father cry. We had the Jack and Jesus wall in our home. Jack Kennedy and Jesus side by side. I always tell the story that Mom said, I put my faith in God and Jesus, and Dad said, you go right ahead. My faith is in the Democrats. And so that's why they were side by side on the wall.
Well, that Jack and Jesus wall was just another lived in detail. It's like the Andover thing. You knew it was there because my grandparents both had Jack and Jesus walls. And God bless them, one of them updated it. They were like, well, JFK didn't work out. We'll put Bobby up. I don't know what they did after Bobby. They might have put Caroline up. You know, some put Martin Luther King up. I've been hearing from people who said they had Jack and Jesus, and then Martin Luther King was added to their wall. Especially some readers who come from the South and who are Black, and I've appreciated them letting me know that. So I was talking with Susan Petrone recently. She's another Ohio author, and she was talking about how 2020 is going to change how we write. COVID-19 and the present protests are fundamental moments that you can't write around. Now, bearing in mind that Erietown is about a specific time and place, do you think your novel would be any different if you started writing it now?
No, because it would still be in the time frame that it was in, and I wouldn't change how I did it. This may be true about writing in this time, but I must say, I really hope that we have new voices and that they belong to many people who are not looking like me in terms of being white. That if indeed, especially at this time of real upheaval, meaningful upheaval, it appears to be finally, in dealing with our country's history of racism, I am not the one to be telling that story. I mean, I've written about race all my career as a journalist, and I certainly feel very strongly that we will make more progress as soon as more white people stop thinking of it as a Black people's problem or a Black community's problem. This is our community. But if indeed this pandemic and this time in history for civil rights is going to change how we write, I hope that means we're also going to be seeing a lot of new writers weighing in on it. I can write my next novel and never touch upon the pandemic. It can just simply happen before the pandemic occurs. Frankly, I don't know everything I'm thinking about during this pandemic. I don't think any of us can fully comprehend what we've been through until it's over, which is why I encourage, especially my young writers, I tell my students all the time, they will be the storytellers of this pandemic because they will live with the impact of this for decades. And so it's really important I learned this from writing And His Lovely Wife. I can look up the factual moments of that time, and I can get the dates right and when debates were and all that. But I was really surprised. It's a good thing I took so many notes. Moments that I thought I would never forget, I wouldn't have remembered at all if I hadn't written them down. And what was so important about those notes is they let me remember how I felt in that moment. And when I look at my students' essays that began in mid-March and what they were writing about by the time the semester was over at the end of May, they had changed so much, many of them, and how they were viewing it. Because initially it was frightening, or it was an inconvenience. Some of them weren't sure they were going to take it seriously. And then many of them got quite scared about it, very concerned about people they love, very worried about what employers were still asking of them, because most of them are in jobs where they're not, they're hourly wage earners and they were being expected to work, to what it meant to be saying goodbye to so much that they thought would happen, graduation, different parties that were going to happen, or different, end of semester events. So I'm glad, if nothing else, they'll have the essays they wrote during that time. And so anybody who's watching this, I encourage all of you to be taking some notes on this, to keep, many of us are not regular journal people, but I think right now it would really matter, not just for your own memory, but for the memories of those you leave behind years from now. Let's do the storytelling as we know it right now. We will be thinking and feeling about this differently once it's behind us. In good ways too, I hope. I just filed my column before we met tonight, and I'm encouraged by how many young people, for example, I had a young writer tell me today how much she misses face-to-face contact with her friends, and how they so took for granted that they could have done that, but they were always texting, they were on apps, they were on social media. And so many of them are talking about how they're going to do this differently. We will not be perfect. We will go back to many of our old ways. But I do wonder if this will make us, the little small things as they once seemed to us are no longer small things. I haven't kissed the tip of a tiny nose on a grandchild for 6 months. And I don't imagine I'll ever do that again once I can, and not realize the gift of that moment in a different way.
Now, you were talking about the different voices, and that segues into my next question. Any authors that you've read lately that you want to make sure you share to the group?
Well, J. Courtney Sullivan has a new novel coming out in about a week and a half. We're going to be in a conversation for Politics and Prose in Washington is one of our things we're doing online. Lee Martin, a wonderful writer who spent time in Columbus and was a Pulitzer finalist for one of his novels, has a new memoir coming out. I'm reading it because I'm going to write a blurb for it. Another, I think, really great book for people who are interested in Ohio history or just the story of Ohio and Ohio politics is David Gippels has a new book coming out, Barnstorming Ohio. I just read that to blurb it. And I don't blurb unless I like a book. I always tell people, let me read it first. And Chasten Buttigieg has got his memoir coming out in the fall. And I just read that to blurb it. I really love it. So those are some of the new books coming that I would encourage readers to look for. I'm never going to tell you my favorite writers because I always hurt somebody's feeling who I forgot to mention, because I have a lot of friends who are writers. But I could tell you what I know is coming out that I've seen. I wish I could remember how to pronounce this last. Jacob Sabro from MSNBC has a wonderful new book coming about immigration and what's been happening at the border. And I just got an advanced reader copy of it, and I haven't read it yet, but I love his reporting, and I think he's done some really important work on helping us understand just what's happening at the border and who is suffering.
Wonderful. Now, this is a full chat box, so I want to make sure I get to that. Is there anything more you want to add about Daughters of Erietown before I start going through this chat box?
No, I don't think. Oh, one more book, though. Duchess Goldblatt. And those who are on Twitter already know who she is. And she's got Becoming Duchess Goldblatt coming out in July, and I recommend that as well. But I'd rather hear from the readers now, the questions they have, and that way I'll know what I can talk about with Daughters of Erietown.
And I want to apologize in advance to anybody who, if we don't get to your question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's a very full list. I'm going to try to get to as many people as I can. First question, working my way backward. Would you raise a child in Erietown?
I don't think I'm a small town person anymore, but I think that Erietown's full of good people. So I wouldn't hesitate if I were looking to live in a smaller town. It's on the lake, it's beautiful. And I speak from knowing Ashtabula, it's got its struggles, but I always feel such a welcome home when I go there. So sure, it's not who I am now. well, first of all, I'm too old to be raising a child, but if I were younger, I think the city called to me, and I do love Cleveland.
You say you're too old to raise a child. How old were Ellie when they got the grandchild to raise?
Right, they were in their late 50s. Right. Oh, you mean the grandparents? They were they were getting into their early 60s. Yeah, late 50s, early 60s. But of course, I'm not saying I couldn't raise a child if I had circumstances that required it. I'm not going to be giving birth to any more children. Let's put it that way.
Now, what were the challenges transitioning from writing a column to writing a novel?
One of the biggest challenges of shifting from journalism to fiction writing is when you reach an impasse or you're stumbling in a section, you can't pick up the phone and interview anyone. It's all got to come up from up here. So sometimes I had to write and just keep writing it through it. 3D Umrigar, whom I love, another local novelist, is known. So good. She is just wonderful. And she gave me great advice. In fact, I think I wrote it in the acknowledgments. When I was really starting to feel stuck, she said, Con, just write 1,000 words a day. 1,000 words a day and you're going to get there. And it was fantastic advice.
If I can throw a pitch in there, anyone who hasn't read it yet, Between the World and Me by 3D
yes.
is just absolutely wonderful.
So many good books by her.
When this book becomes a movie, do you have anybody in mind for Ellie, Brick, or Sam?
I love this question because we have no reason to believe this is going to become a movie, but so many readers are already starting to cast, and I love that. And I was saying, somebody asked me about this yesterday, that, well, Martin Sheen is a dear friend, so I would love to see him be the grandfather, strictly because he's such a good friend. I love Mandy Moore, love her. I would love for her to be Sam. So as you can see, I'm really just casting on preferences. I have no idea who anyone is going to be.
That's permitted.
But I love that people think that way.
Hey, I want to apologize. This is a question that I want to get in. It does involve a bit of plot spoiling. So anyone who hasn't read the book yet, who worries about plot spoilers, this is when we put our earmuffs on. All right. Rosemary loves her son so much. What is going through her mind? Why would she ask someone else to possibly raise him?
Well, let's be careful here. I don't want to give away that plot line. What
Okay.
I will say is this: when somebody is really in distress, it's important for us to understand that we may not know why they're feeling that way, but that doesn't mean they haven't figured out in their heads that this is how they feel. And I will say this as well: if I've ever learned anything from my brother's suicide last year, it's that we can have all kinds of reasons that we think a person should want to keep going, but that doesn't speak at all to what's going on in that person's head.
Absolutely. Now, this isn't a question, but someone did correct me when I was discussing Ohio authors. Somebody noted that I completely neglected to mention Celeste Ng, which is unforgivable in general, but she's also like one of the hottest working authors right now.
Yeah, she just had Little Fires. That just became a movie, and she just sold the rights to her first book. It's going to become a movie as well.
I look forward to watching it. Right. Did you find that you needed to do a lot of research for your novel, or did so much of this come from mind and memory?
Well, again, it goes back to, you can look up you think you know the facts of even your own life, but as a copy editor would sometimes catch me, I have a song in March that doesn't come out until December of 1967, that kind of thing. But I also, so one of the things I did is, many readers may remember this, I don't think they do them anymore, but on card stands, where birthday cards, where they used to have these pamphlets, these booklets you could buy on the year you were born, and it would say, year's greatest song, year's most popular car. I have them from like 1948 through 1996, and I would find them on Etsy, on Amazon, on eBay. I just found them anywhere I could, because it really helped fuel the narrative. But I also did things like, yes, I come with props. This is the train case. Once I knew that I was going to include, that the train case was becoming more important than just that one instance of it, I needed to know what it felt like, what it smelled like, how heavy is it, how much could I fit inside. So I got on Etsy and I found one from the 1950s. So that's how I got this. I love taking it to class as a writer prompt, because none of them can figure out it takes them forever to figure out how to open it, because it's this, and they don't make those anymore. And they say I enjoy it too much, but what are you going to do? And the Annie Glenn moment comes about in part. Annie and John Glenn were both very dear friends. Annie was quite sick at the point when I wrote this scene, but I knew as soon as I saw it what I was going to do. My editor had said, we need to give us not a lot, but a couple more historical reference points. And you might remember Ellie picks up that issue of Life magazine, and I had just been sent that issue by a friend, Ann Hansen, who lives in Montana. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's what I could do, because it's so much a theme of the book, the unsung heroes in life. And there was Annie on Earth, terrified and not able to show it. She had a life photographer with her the entire time that John was up circling the Earth, and she was waiting for him to come down safely. So that magazine that Ellie is looking at is the very magazine I was holding and had spread out on my table as I quote from it. And I could look at the pictures, and I decided which picture to use because I actually had the issue in front of me. So sometimes the research just happens. It's a stroke of luck that it ends up being there.
But that was still such a spectacular anecdote. I mean, that's so memorable. The image of Annie Glenn, not just having to care for the kids, but also having to keep a certain facade up for the sake of society. You're right. It strikes to the themes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's somebody who's in this chat box who should have done this instead of me. Thank you, Margaret Simon. You have spectacular questions. If you could have one do-over in your life, what would it be?
In my life? Nothing that I would say publicly.
Wouldn't take anything from my journey now?
I think we are the accumulation of our experiences. And so everything I've been through and some very difficult times have contributed to who I am in this moment. And I make amends where I can, but I don't spend a lot of time beating myself up for mistakes. And as a writer, I'm lucky because I can just put them in books. I can use them for storylines and get them worked out.
Absolutely. All right. You make a lot of musical references, especially with Sam. What songs in your mind are in Erietown's soundtrack?
I think much of Motown for Sam. And I identify with that. I put CKLW in there for a reason because I grew up in Ashtabula, and that was the radio station I listened to all the time. And so Aretha's there, and Stevie Wonder is there, and the Four Tops. And I mean, it was so much a part. I still listen to Motown all the time. I love it. And it was a great way, I thought, an easy way to show the tension between Sam and her father over music. And I was telling a friend that only after I wrote that, because my dad hated that I liked Black music, as he called it. He hated that I liked Motown, where there's so much tension over that. But I came to understand it a little bit better because, like Sam's father, Brick, my dad, one of his early things we did have in common is we would go to the Hills department store, and later on Nichols, and buy some 45s and play them on my little record player that he had gotten me. And for a while there, I liked his music. I mean, my dad was only 20 years older than I. So he had a young person's interest. But once Motown came on the scene, that I was all about that, right? And that wasn't his music. That wasn't where and so he was feeling the distance from me. It wasn't just about the music. It was that he had lost something that we used to have in common.
And you might have this similar anecdote from your own kids, like that moment you realize, like, oh, no, this is their music, this isn't our music.
Yeah, although I'm lucky that both my kids still like the Beatles and my kids like Motown, so it worked at least a little bit.
Still got it. What music did your dad like? Do you mind me asking?
He loved Dean Martin. He loved Dick Clark 5, I remember. Neil Diamond. I still like Neil Diamond, so mostly probably because it makes me think of my dad. My mother loved Engelbert Humperdinck, so my dad would always get her the Engelbert Humperdinck. He veered into country some, and I love Johnny Cash, as my dad did. I really liked Johnny Cash, and Willie Nelson. So we had our moments where we could cross over. But Dad, he loved the old favorites. He thought he sounded like Dean Martin, and whenever I wanted something from him, I agreed that he sounded exactly like Dean Martin.
Now, you'll have to pardon me, Aunt Nessa.
Yeah.
Scene stealer. Just absolutely a scene stealer. Every time she shows up, every time she's referenced, it enlivens everything. Was that character based on someone you know?
No, I've often thought, though, that she's a combination of two women in my life whom I love so much. My sister, Toni, who's a teacher, and my friend, Sue Klein, who's like another sister, who has never given birth, but has been so close to all her 16 nieces and nephews, and now a great niece. And it's just wonderful with kids and was wonderful to my children. So I wanted to have a character who, because we all know women like that, and an increasing number of women are choosing not to have children, but that doesn't mean they don't love children and understand children. And Nessa also, though, was a symbol of that time. She had to make a choice. If she really wanted a career always, she couldn't be married, because first of all, marriage would prohibit it in some places. Certainly having a child would have prevented her from going back and teaching at that time, because she's much older. So I wanted, in part, to pay tribute to women who made those choices, because it was hard for them and they were judged, but she seems to be oblivious to the judging. I don't know where that came from. It just, over time, I thought, yeah, Nessa, she didn't care about that.
What was the process in naming characters? Was it just like sounds like a Sam, or was it more deliberate than that?
I've always liked the name Samantha, and I wanted a name that could have been a boy's name, Sam, the coach, but it was a girl, so she becomes Samantha. Many of the names, particularly of Ellie and Brick's generation, come from my parents' high school yearbooks, which I originally got copies of from Andover Public Library, because I couldn't find theirs, and I found theirs later. But that's why I acknowledge Andover in the acknowledgements, because that library actually sent them to me. And if anyone's here watching, I do know I owe you those books back, and I will be bringing them back. But because I wanted names that were common in the area. I also walked through old cemeteries where in small towns in Northeast Ohio to get an idea of some of the names that were popular way back when.
So bearing in mind that everything has been closed for about 4 months,
yeah.
Have you been finding yourself doing more of the cemetery walks lately?
No, I'm pretty much home. I'm trying to model the behavior that if you don't have to be out, if you're not an essential worker, stay home as much as possible and wear a mask when you're not home. Sherrod is being very safe. Also, they're driving to Washington. He has a staff person who virtually has no life, because he's trying to make sure he's so safe when he's not with Sherrod, that he doesn't expose Sherrod to anything. So we're home a lot, which is actually a great place for a writer. I miss my friends. I certainly miss my students, but I wouldn't be seeing them right now anyway. But I'm using this as a time to write. I mean, we're doing a lot of stuff at the book tour because it was all canceled as far as in-person events. And I'm so grateful to everyone who showed up tonight, because I was really looking forward to being with you in person, but it just couldn't be. And I hope at some point we will see one another. But for now, I'm home a lot. I'm researching, of course, as always. And I will probably be walking those cemeteries again soon.
I mean, it's okay. We're going to catch you on the next novel. Next time, you're going to come on out. It's going to be a good time.
I would love that.
All right. One more question that I'm seeing in the chat. If you've written a question in the chat and I've missed it, feel free to re-enter it now. One question that I know I missed is there anything that you now that it's out and it's done, is there any detail you wish you could have back that you wish you could change now? Or
that's the nature of my writing. I mean, I don't even read my columns once they're published unless I'm looking for a mistake, because of course I would redo things. And when I turned in this novel, I don't know why it didn't occur to me to even think about how long is an average novel. It was 197,000 words. And my editor said, yeah, the average novel is about 110. So it ended up being 122,000, but I had to cut a lot from this book. Not much, but a few things I think I can work into the next one. But I don't regret overwriting, because I had to learn. This was such a process and it took so long. And I certainly hope not to take this long to write the next novel. I learned a great deal from the editing process, but I am sure there is much we're finding occasional mistakes, and we are able to correct them right away on the digital versions. I love when readers privately let me know something like, Aunt Nessa's last name is Travis. It was originally Riley, but we switched it when we realized Angie, and I didn't catch it when she's at the store, for example, when they're at the store at Higbee's. So we're going to fix that right away. And this book already went into its second edition before it came out. So on the third edition, we'll have some of those things corrected. As many mistakes as we thought we caught, and so many looked at it, something slipped by.
A lot of people are wanting to know if we can get a couple details on what about the next one. And I know you mentioned the bookstore.
I think there is going to be a bookstore. I think two of the main characters will be a grandmother and her granddaughter, who is in her 20s, who may come to live with her for a while for reasons I don't want to get into yet. But I'm pretty excited about the idea I have, actually. So that's a good place to be if you're going to be writing again, right?
All right. One last question I'm seeing. Have you been back to Higbee's Silver Grill as an adult?
I went there when it was still open in the 80s, I believe, and then it closed. So unless it's reopened, I don't even know. But I think we did an event there a few years ago. It was open as kind of a party place now, but not a restaurant. Is that right?
Right. You can book brunches there.
Yeah, I went to some event, I think for Share It there at some point. But of course, no. And I didn't have that experience as a child. I didn't even go to that until I was, I think, in my 20s when I was in law school.
I want to thank you so much for your time. It has been a delight. Please give Franklin an extra treat for being so polite.
And Walter, he's been so quiet. Usually Walter's scratching at the door. So I'm grateful to them. Thank you, everyone. Jason, thank you for doing this. Thank you for, we've got Amanda and Carol, and we've got Travis who've been just made the whole thing happen. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight.
Thank you, Connie.